more of the just general instruction on how to catch bass for fun fishing?
Generally, how to catch bass for fun. Because I mean, if you catch them for fun, you catch them for tournaments. I'm assuming so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. And as far as your electronics and stuff in your boat goes, what type of electronics do y'all have?
I got the both of us actually have a Lowrance HDS 12, the new one that came out,
Perfect.
and also I got the Garmin Live Sight or Live Scope.
Awesome.
So I got yeah. I struggle with the Garmin. I mean, I can see with the Live Scope, but it's hard to tell. You know, especially bass fishing. Crappie, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Bass, it's hard to tell. You know, because they lay across the bottom a lot, things like that. See, unless they move, you can't see them.
Exactly.
Using the down scan and things like that with the Garmin, I don't really know the settings and things like that on that one. It's the newer model.
Yep.
So more research on that one than I haven't done it yet. So but the low rents were pretty good on that one. I mean, I wish I had the low rents in the front.
Perfect. Well, we're definitely going to be able to find some good fish then offshore. To breaking down Lake St. Clair, I'll talk to you about, like you mentioned when you signed up, about the offshore fishing, and then we'll also just talk about finding bass in general on this lake, because the lake sets up similar to a lot of the lakes I fish here in central Arkansas. We're kind of in the same kind of weather zone, I guess, as far as what the weather sets up like in the winter and the summer, things like that. And so I should be able to help you out with some patterns as well as some areas to check out. Cool. So as far as the lesson goes too, do you guys want me to focus mainly on the offshore stuff, or is it also just trying to maybe how to catch good fish in general?
Maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I think this lake really gets a lot of pressure.
It gets a ton.
Yeah, tons of tournaments and things like that. This past weekend they had a 120 tournament. So, you know, typically, I mean, most people are going to be fishing up around, you know, banks, things like that. But, you know, the offshore obviously is where the majority of the fish go, it seems like, anyway, on that lake. So, you know, at least kind of where they go, what to look for, and things like that on that lake. And that'll be good.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Well, what I will do then is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and then you'll be able to see what I'm looking at. And the way I normally run my lessons is I'm going to start by giving you a high-level overview of the lake, kind of how it sets up, different sections of the lake that you might want to think about fishing. And then after that, I'll jump into some specifics on how to find fish offshore, just some processes so you can go and find them. And then after that, we'll jump into Navionics and Google Earth, and we'll look at specific spots. So we'll go kind of high level first, maybe stuff that you may have heard from my videos and stuff before, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we'll get really down into the nitty gritty of like these points, these areas. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Cool. So let me share my screen then here, and just let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. So as far as we got here, we have a lot of really good potential areas to check out on Lake St. Clair. And so we're going to be doing a lot on the Navionics, looking at contour lines, stuff like that. But before I ever get into Navionics, then my number one tool for breaking down the lake is actually Google Earth. I spend more time on Google Earth than I do on Navionics, which I think surprises a lot of people because they think, well, you can't really see what's on the bottom, what's going on Google Earth. But what you can see specifically are the types of cover that are available, as well as the water clarity, which is huge.
And yeah, I just shot a video and made some. I went back and found some road beds and things like that, based on what you talked about with the Google Earth. So
awesome. Yeah, so the big thing I noticed when I started taking a look at Lake St. Clair, I looked at Lake Oconee several times before. But looking at St. Clair, I noticed it is, in general, a little bit dirtier than Oconee is.
Right.
And it looks like the majority of the lake, you might have no more than about 2 foot of visibility in about 80% of the lake.
Right.
That sound about right?
Yeah, down at the lower end where the dam's at, it's you can probably see 4 or 5 feet down there.
Because it connects to Oconee, and why it's dirtier, I don't know, but it does.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so when I'm just looking at the lake here, you can kind of just see up in like maybe even this midsection of the lake, and especially up in these creeks, you can see this water has this kind of brown, almost brighter green tinge to it. And then the water definitely gets darker, which means it's clearer down here by the dam, like you mentioned, and then also up in this creek for some reason, probably because it's running away from the river. And so really when I'm trying to look for fish offshore, I have some general guidelines that I like to follow. And so I'm going to be pulling this up several times. This is just a few pages from my offshore fishing playbook, which you may have heard me talk about in my videos. And one thing that I always want to start out with, especially when we're talking about offshore fish, is we want to figure out how deep do we need to be fishing based on the water visibility. And so really what happens is that when you're trying to find fish offshore, the only time those fish are going to eat your bait is when they can actually see your bait. And that seems very obvious, and kind of the way I explain it is if you're walking into, let's say, your bedroom with the lights off, and behind you you have the living room lights on. That means the light's kind of shining into your bedroom. If you walk 10 feet into your bedroom, you might be able to see what's going on, see all the stuff on the tables, because the light from the living room is shining into the bedroom. But if you walk 20 foot in your bedroom with the lights off, it's a lot harder to see. Walk 30 foot in your bedroom and you can't see a thing. And that's what happens with fish and bass as well when you have different water clarities. So in water visibility, let's say that's 0 to 1 feet. When it's sunny outside, the fish might not be able to see deeper than about 8 feet of water. That's as deep as they can actually see down, like see in the water. And so they're not going to be able to eat if they can't see what they're eating. Just like we would never eat breakfast in a completely dark room in our bedroom with the lights off. You would turn the lights on or you go to the kitchen where the lights are on. And so when you're looking at this water visibility kind of guidelines, these are just kind of guidelines I've figured out over the years just experimenting for 9 years. But basically, you can see that when you get kind of that like 1 to 2 foot of visibility range, you might be fishing no deeper than 15 feet. When you get to the 2 to 4 foot of visibility, you might not be fishing deeper than about 25 feet. And this is when you have bright, sunny conditions. So when it's bright and sunny, these fish might be only in these depths of water based on these clarities. And then on a cloudy day, when there's no sun, there's no light, these fish in the 1 to 2 foot of visibility, they might not be able to see anything deeper than 5 feet of water. And so all of this to be said is that while you guys want to find some fish offshore, just based on the fact that this lake is really, really muddy, along the lot of the lake, let's say a foot, maybe 2 foot of visibility, there may not be an offshore bite on 80 to 90% of this lake, depending on the day. That doesn't mean there's not fish out there, though. There probably are fish that are living in 25 foot of water, even here in the middle of the lake where you have a foot to 2 foot of visibility. The problem, though, is that those fish that are sitting in 25 feet of water can't see anything, so they're not going to be eating. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, when we go to bed and take a nap, we turn the lights off and sleep in a dark room. And so a lot of these fish in the summertime, or in the wintertime, they're just going to be chilling in 25 foot of water in the middle of the lake, just resting until maybe the sun gets up enough where they can actually see in the water, or they may just move shallow to feed up in 4, 5, 6 feet of water, and then pull back out into 25 foot to rest. And so with all that being said, if I was going to try to go out on Sinclair and let's say try to find some fish offshore, really I'm going to be looking for water visibilities that are somewhere between, let's say, 2 to 4 foot of visibility. What that means is that these fish on a sunny day might be as deep as 25 feet of water, but maybe on a cloudy day, the fish might be in 10 foot of water, but they'll still be offshore. And what that means is that I really can eliminate, in the winter, 80% of the lake, and if I want to just focus on offshore fishing, I need to be fishing here or fishing down here by the dam if I want to actually catch fish, if they want to get the fish to bite. Does that all make sense?
It does, yeah.
Awesome. So that is just one of the advantages of Google Earth, because I can go in and I can say, okay, well, if I want to fish offshore, here's where I'm going to be fishing. And then if I was going to try to fish in another part of the lake, I would probably be focusing on fishing shallow and fishing in shallow docks, vegetation, rocks in any other part of the lake where I don't have the clear water.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So then the next thing is, okay, well, we've kind of identified that we have this creek here that has potentially some offshore fish, and we have some fish down here that maybe are going to be offshore. And then the next thing we have to figure out is where are the fish, which is kind of a basic question, but it can be kind of difficult, obviously, to find the fish. And it's even more difficult at times in the winter because these fish only feed sometimes for 1 to 2 hour windows in the winter. So you might pull into a pocket like this, And you might be pulling in here, and this could have 25 pounds of bass, 5-pounders all over the place in this pocket. But if you pull in here at 9 o'clock in the morning, you might not catch any fish. And then someone else could pull back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they could catch 25 pounds of bass out of this pocket. And so there's really small, short feeding windows that these fish will actually feed in. And so you could be doing everything right, fishing the right area, the right bait, everything. But if you're there at the wrong time, you're not going to catch any fish.
Well, most of our weather is we get like a month and a half in winter, if that.
Yep.
Warm. So.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, that same thing happens in in the summertime, in the fall. In the summer, you might have a 2 hours or 3 hours where these fish feed in certain areas. In the spring, it might be a 2 to 3 hour window. Usually, there's going to be these feeding windows where these fish are biting. And so, regardless of whether you're fishing in the winter, in the summer, any time of the year, what I'm trying to figure out when I go to the lake is I want to figure out that this pocket right here has a bunch of fish in it. And then I want to come through and I want to try to fish the same pocket 3, 4, 5 times throughout the day to hit that timing correct. Obviously, you need to figure out which pockets have the fish in it, but that's where we're going to kind of get into, and that's why we're starting real high level, and we're going to dig down in if that all makes sense.
Sounds good.
Perfect. So then how would you actually go about determining, let's say, this pocket is loaded with fish? And usually what I try to do is I'm going to use right here what I call the offshore bass locator decision tree. I need to change this name because it's way too long and it's hard to say. But basically, it is a flow chart of kind of figuring out where to find fish. And so on a lake like Sinclair where you're going to have forage like bait fish, you'll have, I think you have threadfin shad in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have thread fins, and so you have good amounts of bait balls that are in this lake. And so you'll have a lot of bait, which is good. And then also, given the fact that you have 2 to 4 foot of visibility, you can also see fish on your fish finder. And so what I always tell guys is I say you can find fish on your fish finder and identify an area just by graphing around and driving around the lake. You don't ever have to make a cast to tell that the bass are there. And what I find usually is that even if the fish aren't like positioned in a really perfect looking area, let's say on a point or on a hump or a ridge or whatever it would be, what you can find is sometimes you just graph around in the middle of a pocket and you'll just start seeing these big balls of bait fish, and you'll start seeing all these dots right here, all bass. They're just a ton of bass suspended out in front of a piece of structure with these big bait balls. And I was out actually on a lake on Saturday where we pulled into a pocket, and I mean, it was like we didn't see much bait fish all day. There weren't that many fish, and all of a sudden we pulled into a pocket, and it was like the screen exploded. It looked like there was an error on the screen because there was so much bait, so many fish around. And what we did is we literally drove around the lake. This was during an on-the-water fishing lesson. We drove around the lake for, let's say, 2 to 3 hours, and we started maybe in the first part of a creek. Then we went to the middle of a creek. Then we went to the back of a creek. Then we moved to a new section of the lake over here. And we checked this pocket. And after graphing around for 45 minutes, we realized this pocket right here was loaded with bait fish. And we saw fish all out in front of this pocket. Well, what we then thought is, okay, well, the fish are here. They're in the middle of this pocket, like let's say out here in the middle of this area. But we were seeing them all over the graph like this. So there's bait fish everywhere. There's fish everywhere. But we weren't seeing very many bait fish or fish up on top of the drops. In this case, there are a lot of fish on top of the drops. But in the case before, just imagine this is empty and clear. And so what we realized is that these bait fish and the fish were just not ready to bite yet. They were just hanging out here in the middle of the channel, in the middle of the pocket. And so what I told the guy I was with, I was like, well, we know there's bait fish here. We know there's bass here, just seeing them on the graph. These fish at some point are going to start feeding on these bait fish. And the way that bass like to feed on bait fish is they like to push the bait fish into shallower water. And so this kind of image illustrates this, where we have several bass right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bass, and there's a few more. This is a ball of bait fish right here. And these bass are literally coming in and breaking up this ball of bait fish. And then you see another ball of bait fish here, here, here. This is all bait fish. And what these bass are doing is they're ambushing this ball of bait fish and breaking it apart into these smaller clumps when that bait fish got close to the shallower water. And the reason for that is because it's easier for bass to ambush in shallow water as it is in deep water. Just like, if I was going to throw let's say I throw a bowling ball into a swimming pool. Would you, if I was like, hey, you want to get this bowling ball in the swimming pool, and I'll give you two options. I'll throw it in the deep end of the pool that's 15 feet deep, or the kiddie end of the pool that's a foot deep. Where do you want me to throw it? Well, obviously the 1 foot side of the pool, it's easier to get out. And that's just like the bass. They want to chase these bait fish in 10 foot of water rather than chasing them around in 45 feet of water where there's a lot of places for them to escape. Is that all making sense?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, that's the main. I think a lot of times we go out first thing in the morning, and we just start fishing. Especially when I take my kids out, things like that, versus trying to drive all over the lake and trying to really do my homework beforehand. And that's my main thing is where do I need to go? And I kind of do that. I'm trying to look at certain areas. I look at on the map and think this is where it'll probably be pretty good. This will be pretty good. But the majority of what I'm fishing in is also in that muddier water.
Yep.
So problem. So.
Yep, staying in that muddy water, you won't be able to. There will be fish offshore. You might see them on your graph. They just won't be able to bite because they won't see your bait.
Okay, I got you.
It's huge.
Now, on that muddier water and deeper water, would it be more, to go with maybe, a rattle trap or, or a, something else that's going to make, a lot of noise and things like that to kind of get a trigger bite off of that?
So, let's say we were running up. Where in the lake are you normally fishing? Up one of these arms in here, maybe?
Well, normally we go up around, Twin Bridges and put in there, so it's all the way to the very top of the lake.
Oh, way up here?
The more east side of the lake, or west side of the lake.
Oh, gotcha. Over on this.
Yeah, if you zoom out, it'll be, basically kind of something like that, where it's pretty muddy up in there.
Yeah, so, in this section, if I was going to go fish up here, honestly, I wouldn't fish deeper than 5 foot of water all day.
Okay.
I would never fish offshore in this water clarity in the winter. And in the summer, I might fish offshore sometimes if you have maybe 2 foot of visibility. But the offshore fishing I'm going to be doing is in 8 foot of water, 9 foot of water. So it's not going to be fishing in 20 feet. And so the things that I'd be really looking for, especially where you get this real dirty water, a couple of things that are always really good in these lakes. One is fishing any sort of rock that you can find. So man-made rock, like a rocky bank, any sort of chunk rock down the bank. I'm trying to find something, even like this riprap. That sort of stuff is going to be really, really, really good. The other stuff that's going to be good, which I'm not seeing a lot in this section of the lake, but is the shoreline grass, which there is some shoreline grass. I'm sure you guys have seen that before.
Yeah, it's not as much, but I have actually, the majority of my bass I caught this summer was around the grass.
There's very little grass. See that island right there?
Yep.
There's a lot all around this side of the island, not that side, but this side of the river side.
Yep.
Right in that area there's
a ton of structure, fallen trees, and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, see, I guess you can kind of see the difference in the water clarity there because it gets deeper.
Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit clearer through here. And as you go through this lake, you can actually, one trick I use all the time is I'm looking at Google Earth here in December. Actually, no, it's not December. I think it's a January date. Let's see. This is in March 2018. And whenever I'm looking at a lake like this in March, one thing is that the grass is always going to die out in the wintertime. And the best patches of grass I always find, I saw some over on this side of the lake, are the sections of grass that are still in the water and still visible when the lake is still in that kind of winter time. And so, for example, like this grass right here, you can see down this bank, this darker patch right there. All the rest of the grass in this whole area, and there's another stretch of grass right here. This is the grass that survived the winter, which means that's going to be the thickest, nicest grass that you can find. And in the wintertime and in the spring and the pre-spawn, all that stuff, these patches of grass that are left that are still potentially green or still a little bit thick, you can see on Google Earth, those are going to hold fish year round on your lakes. You can catch them on a chatterbait, a spinnerbait, and a lipless crankbait in this grass. You can just run the grass with the lipless crankbait all day and probably catch 10 to 15 pounds consistently all winter long, all the way through March, if you just did that all day long.
Okay.
Now, to find them, you have to go on Google Earth and you have to scroll through and say, okay, where are the patches of grass? And so you might not just be able to fish a lipless crankbait willy-nilly. It's like, hey, I'm going to fish this little section right here, from here to here. Then I'm going to go find another stretch of grass that's in the water, and I'll roll through around the lake, and I'll just try to say, okay, where's the next piece of grass? And it might be a quarter mile or a mile down the lake until you find another stretch of grass that fits the bill. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
I got you.
Like right through here, for example.
Yeah.
So that's one pattern that works, especially as you get in the dirtier sections of the lake. There's another thing you can do in these dirty sections is you can do the same approach I was talking about earlier, which is finding the bait fish. And then what happens if you find an area with lots of bait fish around, you can find usually some group of bass is going to be close by. And let's say you're back in one of these pockets and you just are driving around pocket to pocket and you notice that this pocket is just flooded with bait. There's bait everywhere. There's a pretty good chance then that as the sun comes up, let's say it gets to be noon, 1 o'clock, the fish might pull up underneath some of these boat docks, in the shade, maybe in some of these laydowns. And if this pocket is loaded with bait fish, the bait fish are going to push up shallow into the shade of the boat docks. The bass will follow, and then you can crush them for an hour or two in a pocket like this with the boat docks, fishing a jig, a spinnerbait around the boat docks.
Yeah.
And so really what it comes down to, though, is what you'll find on a lake like this or any lake really in the country is that there's going to be a lot of dead water all around the lake. So there's going to be 90% of this lake is going to be pretty dead, where you're not going to see that many fish or that much bait fish. But then 10% of the lake is going to be super lively, where there's bait fish everywhere, there's lots of fish everywhere. And so I guess what I always thought of is, well, we invest in $3,000 Lowrance units, and if you're going to spend $3,000 on a Lowrance unit, you might as well use it to go try to find some fish. And what I always say is the easiest way, even if you're not going to graph offshore structure or anything, is to always try to find pockets that have bait fish in them before I start fishing. And usually what I do on any fishing day is I won't start making a cast, especially in the winter, until I pull into an area where I start seeing these big bait balls every 10 to 15 seconds. That's kind of my rule of thumb. I want to see a big bait ball on my fish finder every 10 to 15 seconds. And that usually means when I'm just like driving into a pocket like this. So I might just drive down the center of this pocket straight in here. If I'm not seeing bait fish every 10 to 15 seconds, I'm not even bothering with this area. I'm running over here and I'm checking this creek. Then I run over here and I check this bank. And I run over here and check these banks. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's always kind of one way to do it. Now, obviously, I'm not just running willy-nilly to some random pocket or random bank. I'm picking out spots using Navionics where I believe there's a better potential to have either bait fish or potentially to have crawfish. There's actually I've read online that there's a strong crawfish population on Lake Sinclair. And so you also will be able to find places where there are crawfish. And basically the places where you're going to have the best potential to find crawfish or baitfish, actually we'll start with the baitfish like threadfin shad. The best places you're going to find them are anywhere, especially winter, summer, doesn't matter, anywhere where a creek channel, like this main river channel right here, swings up against shallower water. And these mean different things in like the summer, the spring, the winter. And so I'll start by breaking it down in all the different seasons. So, for example, in the winter, you might find that the best places are going to be where that creek channel comes really, really close to the banks, like right next to the bank. And usually when you graph down these creek channels from one end of the lake to the other, you're going to find that the majority of the bait fish you find is going to be in close proximity to one of these creek channels. And you kind of get what I'm saying when I'm seeing the creek channel here? Yeah, okay. And so what I'll do is I will then look and I'll find, okay, where are creek channels coming up in close proximity to the bank? And the big thing that I find in the winter is that bass really, especially like in a place like Lake Sinclair, is that the bass in January are already thinking about spawning. They want to spawn right away. When that water temperature, hits like 57 degrees, they want to be moving up to spawn. And so these fish, they don't want to be really, really far away from the backs of the creeks, the backs of the pockets, places where they could potentially spawn. They want to be really, really close by, but they also want to be around some sort of creek channel or some sort of deeper water as well. And so usually the best places for me in the wintertime are places where we have a main river channel coming in close proximity to the bank that's right out in front of a spawning pocket. So it's kind of all three of those components. Plus, I want to see the bait fish in the creek channel. So there's four things: bait fish, creek channel close to a bank, steep kind of drops, and then some sort of spawning pocket. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'd be looking for, and then I'll just go around the lake and, based on the water clarity and stuff like that, I might find that, this spot down here where the creek channel comes up really close to the bank, if let's say the water visibility here is 1.5 foot visibility, well, maybe these fish are only going to be sitting in 4, 5, 6 feet of water, where if maybe the water visibility is 4 or 5 foot, these fish might be sitting maybe a little bit deeper off this point. They might be sitting out here in 5, 10, 15, 20 foot of water off this point if you have the clear water. But all the best fish are going to be right where a creek channel swings close to a bank by a spawning pocket. And it also has the bait fish in it.
Sweet. All right, makes sense.
Awesome. And then as you kind of move into the other parts of the year, let's say the pre-spawn, a lot of the places then that I like to fish are actually a little bit more into the creeks. And so it's not like there's not bass in the creeks in the winter, or there's not bass during the spawn out here on the main lake. But it seems like the most catchable bass for me in the winter are the ones that are more towards the main lake where this creek channel swings up against close to a bank. You can catch them back in the creeks too in the winter, but it's just easier to catch them on these type of areas in the winter. But then as it gets to the spring, the type of areas I'm looking for, like let's say from February through, let's say, April, are places where that same exact phenomenon's happening, where a creek channel, let's say a little bit deeper channel like this, swings up against a bank close to a spawning pocket, but it's somewhere where it's back in a creek. Does that kind of make sense? So it's going to be like right here where maybe this channel cuts through and you can see these contour lines get really, really tight together through here and then start to get a little bit more spread apart, and then you get a spawning pocket. This is the type of bank in the pre-spawn that I would say is going to be on fire. Same as like this bank right here. Really steep contour lines, the channel kind of cuts in, and it gets to be a flatter pocket. But these spots, again, are going to be more towards the backs of the creeks in more protected water. Out here, the fish will spawn back in these pockets, but the lake is a lot less protected, and that kind of messes with the fish in the spring a little bit when there's so much wind and current that could be going through this lake. They like to be a little bit more in the creeks, or the fish are easier to catch at least in the creeks because there's a lot less commotion going on. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. And then as you kind of go through the summer, this summertime is different in the fact that these fish then, they also want to be by a creek channel, but they don't really care as much about being close to a spawning pocket because they're not going to worry about spawning now for another year, basically. So they don't really care if they're close to a spawning pocket, if they're close to a bank or anything like that. All they care about is being close to a creek channel. And so usually what you can find is that these fish are going to be setting up as close to a main river channel or a creek channel as they can find, and they're going to get as deep as they can possibly get. And what I mean by that is if we kind of go back to this chart here, as deep as they possibly can get is basically as deep as they can see in the water to feed. And so let's say down by the dam, if you have 2 to 4 foot of visibility, these fish might be as deep as 25 feet of water. And so what you'll look for is you'll look for places kind of in the creeks, on the main lake, anywhere basically, where a main river channel, a steep bank, comes up close to 25 feet of water. So you got 25 feet of water maybe right here off this little point. It's right next to the main river channel. This spot could be pretty good. Same thing with maybe this point that runs out here. 24, 25 for the water right here, close to the deep water. That could be a good spot. Same thing with this point right here, 25 for the water, close to the main river channel. And you kind of go so on and so forth. Main river channel cuts right here, 25 foot of water off the end of this point, the end of this point. Here's another channel that comes through, 25 foot of water right here. The fish could be setting up right there. Does that make sense on kind of what I'm looking at, what I'm looking for?
What time that would be best?
What's up?
Summertime, you said?
Summertime, yep. So summertime. And so what you'll find then is, okay, well, these fish are in 25 foot of water when the water clarity is 2 to 4 foot of visibility. Let's see here. When we have 25 foot of visibility, but then let's say that the water is dirtier in the summer, 1 to 2 foot of visibility. Well, these fish then might not get any deeper than 15 feet of water. So then what I might do is I might run up the lake, and I'm going to basically say, okay, well, let me find an area, let's say, that has 1 to 2 foot of visibility. And I know these fish aren't going to get deeper than 15 foot of water. So let me find a place where we have a main river channel coming up close to 15 foot of water. Boom. Spot right here. Let's see what else we got. 15 foot of water. I'm just going to kind of scan around the lake and figure out any place where you have a sharp creek channel close to 15 foot of water. Maybe right in through here. Creek channel, point. They sit right here in 15 foot. It could be also kind of around this point through here. And it doesn't really matter, like, if it's a point, if it's a hump, if it's any sort of type of structure. All that matters is that you have a creek channel close to 15 foot of water where these fish can see and feed.
Okay.
That's all that matters. And in all cases, when I'm trying to catch fish offshore, one thing you mentioned earlier is you don't really like to drive around too much when you have your kids and stuff in the boat. Well, usually when I'm fishing offshore, especially in the summer and getting into the fall, I usually drive 6 of my 8 hours of fishing when I fish offshore. I'm driving my boat for 6 of my 8 hours.
Okay.
And I'm only fishing for 2 hours. And that is something that can be very challenging for guys to do. And it's something that a lot of guys, when I do lessons with them, I get done doing a lesson and they're like, okay, I thought I was going to be an offshore fisherman. And they're like, I don't like offshore fishing. It sucks. I drive my boat all day. I burned a half a tank of gas just in my boat, just idling. And we only fish for 2 hours. I only fish 3 days a month, and I don't want to spend 2 of my days just driving my boat.
Yeah.
So that is something to kind of just keep in mind, is that it looks glamorous when I do my YouTube videos where I go catch a bunch of fish offshore. What you don't see is the 6 hours of driving I do to find my 2 groups of fish where I catch 10 fish for the video. And yeah, I catch 10 fish in my fishing day, but I drove my boat for 6 hours, fished for 45 minutes, and filmed for 30 minutes. So I did 45 minutes of fishing in 8 hours, but I did catch 10 fish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what you're earning.
Yep. And that's the thing too, is it's fine to do that on like a fun fishing day. But what you can do is, let's say you had 2 days in a row to fish, or you could practice on a Friday, fish a tournament on a Saturday. One thing that you can do is you can spend your whole day the day before just graphing offshore structure, driving around and finding fish. And what you can do is you can go around and say, okay, I have 1 to 2 foot of visibility. These fish are going to be anywhere from 15 feet or less. I'm going to graph every single spot in the summertime where we have 10 to 15 foot of water close to a main river channel. And you can just graph for 8 hours and graph everything. And what you're looking for is again, the bait fish, the fish. You might actually start seeing some fish on your fish finder, like on the bottom, like you'll see in my videos, like on my ledge videos, stuff like that. You'll start seeing the dots, seeing the bass. And what you'll do then is you can mark, and let's say you have one spot here, another spot here, another spot here, another spot over here. And you can get a stockpile of 10, 15, 20 spots, maybe 8 spots. And what you can do then is in your tournament day, you don't have to worry about graphing as much. All you have to do is worry about fishing. And you can just run here, fish this spot for 15 minutes, run to the next spot, fish it for 15 minutes, run over here, fish it for 15 minutes. And what I like to do is create like a stockpile of, let's say, 10 or 15 spots I can run. And I'll run each spot 3 times throughout the day, fishing it for 10 to 15 minutes apiece.
Okay.
And the reason I'm doing that, kind of like I mentioned earlier, is that these fish, they bite in certain feeding windows. So let's say there's a 2-hour period where these fish can feed. Well, I want to fish this point 3 different times throughout the day at 8 a.m., 11 a.m., and 1 p.m. And that gives me 3 chances to hit that timing right. Well, I might never hit the timing right on this spot, and I don't catch anything here. But I might hit the timing right perfect one time here. I might hit the timing right one time here. And then the other 8 spots, I never hit the timing right. But I catch 4 fish off this spot, 5 fish off this spot, and I do well in the tournament.
Yeah.
That's kind of then the process that I go through. And so I was able to use my time driving around and prepping to find 8 areas. Then I'm just kind of playing the odds that I hit the timing right every 2-3 times a day.
Gotcha. Let me ask you now, what do you actually use to determine the visibility?
So usually what I do is I just take my I take a bright white bait, like a white spinnerbait, a white crankbait. I just stick my pole straight down in the water, and I just see how far down I can see the bait. And I kind of grab the tip of my rod, and I'm just like, oh, that's about 2 foot of visibility.
Okay. That was one of the techniques that you use versus just, that you can actually tell a little bit more. I mean, I've taken the line and kind of dropped the line down and kind of seen, but you really know it to the very end, and then doing it that way, you kind of know based on the pole. So yeah, it makes a lot more sense, a lot easier. So.
Yep. And before I ever get into an area, I'll launch the boat, and I'll stick my pole down. I probably stick my pole down in the water to check the visibility 15 times a day.
Okay.
Because I might find that over here you have 2 foot of visibility, and then up here you have 4 foot of visibility, and then right out here you have a foot of visibility. It can change just like pretty quick around the lake. And so you could waste a lot of time, let's say, graphing in 20 foot of water over here because you're like, oh, well, it's 4 foot of visibility over here, and you just kind of don't pay attention to what the water looks like. And you get over here and you're graphing in 25 foot of water in a foot of visibility, and you're like, oh, I just wasted 2 hours of time graphing.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. No, even now on Sinclair, people still fish docks nonstop.
And that's the thing that, there's probably guys who win tournaments just fishing docks all day long, day in, day out. And for the dock pattern, what I can say is on lakes like this, I have a lot of lakes that look like this in my area. Usually what the guys do that are good on the docks is they just have, especially this time of year in the summer, they know every single dock that has a crappie top or a brush pile around the boat docks. Or they plant them there themselves. And then they just know there's 37 docks with crappie tops, and they run as many docks as they can in an 8-hour day, and they catch 4 to 10 bass. And that's how they do well in the tournament.
Yeah.
And that's something you can do. You can replicate that by, let's say, going in and just going into a creek like this, and you could just graph with your side imaging and your down imaging. And what I do is I actually will graph, like, let's say, one way down this creek. And on your Lowrance unit, what you can do is you can set your
The right side.
yeah, just to the right side, and then with the down imaging down, and just graph the front of these docks. And like on this case, just scan just to the left, and then have the down imaging and just scan like this. And I've had days where I've gone to tournaments where I just graphed brush piles all day long and practiced 8 hours. I came back the next day, never fished a single one of the brush piles. I just found as many as I could, and then I just made it a goal to fish as many as I could all day, and I would do well in the tournament because I just fished 36 brush piles in 8 hours, and I caught, 5 to 7 bass out of those 30 brush piles.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's the main thing is just trying to figure out the tricks. Because, I never grew up on a big lake. I had a 10-acre pond. And that's all I fished.
Gotcha.
So electronics and things like that, it's all new to me. So I just got mine this year. So I'm trying to learn all the tricks and things like that. So, but I know, I guess the Lowrance does the arches for the bass. And then I guess the dots for the crappie. Now, is that right?
No, so that depending on what you're using for your the view, what I can pull up here, this is from a Lowrance, the new Lowrance HDS unit. And if you're using the fish, or no, what's it called? It's the live view or whatever it is. The
Live sight, live scope.
or not live scope. It's a fish reveal where it's like it.
Right.
Yep, in that Lowrance unit, always turn the fish reveal off on lakes like yours. You're not going to need that. Fish reveal is not going to help you guys. It's actually going to hurt you guys more than it will help you.
Okay.
There's reasons to use it, and I plan on getting in a boat with some guy who has one of those units. There's a reason to use it, but what happens is that 80% of the time, the fish that they show up, that the fish reveal shows you, isn't actually a bass. They don't show bass very well. They show a lot of the other junk fish really well. And so this is actually from a Lowrance, brand new Lowrance HDS Live 12-inch unit, this recording I got from a guy. And I was out on the boat with him. And in this image, these dots right here, this is a bass. This is a bass. That's a bass. Bass, bass, bass. This is a ball bait fish. So these are all your bass right here.
Okay.
And then if we take a look at another image, I actually have an image of some crappie. So
It look like a Christmas tree, like they.
So right here is a let me find. Right here is a stack of crappie.
Okay.
So crappie, what crappie look like is basically you'll see a bunch of stuff, just all these little dots grouped really tight together. And so the crappie like to kind of, the way I think about it is the crappie, they like to group up like side by side as close as they can get together, like packed together as tight as they can. Or the bass, they prefer to have their own kind of elbow room. They like to spread out from one another. And so the way you can tell bass from crappie is not by the size of the dots, what the dots look like. It's by how the dots are arranged on the screen.
Okay.
So the dots, when they're spread apart, like you can see this dot has like an inch apart from this guy. All of these dots have a lot of space between them. Right here, we caught a 6 and 3 5-pounders off the spot right here.
Okay.
And there are just these dots, and there was bait fish right by the dots. And usually when you can find bait fish in proximity to the dots, that's when you know that those fish are going to be actively feeding.
Okay. Yeah, because the guy went out there was actually a Lowrance salesman. He actually works directly with Lowrance. He was the one that was telling me the arches were the bass. So, and then he says if you just sitting there, then they'll be straight, and it just means that the fish isn't moving. But he was telling me that arches were actually the bass.
Yeah, so that is the case when you have the 2D sonar. So when you're running 2D sonar, let me try to find a picture of that real quick. The 2D sonar is the case. So if I pull up, let me find.
Yeah, because I think what we were looking at was a down scan with the overlay. I guess it was one of the 2D.
Yep. So this is your 2D sonar here, where you can see these arches.
Right. Yep.
Those arches are your that's what any fish looks like, whether it's crappie, striper, anything. And this only happens when the boat's moving, and then when the boat is stationary, the fish will appear as lines.
Right. Yeah, that's what he was saying.
And then with your HDS, with the live stuff, you're gonna get these kind of lines and arches, and you'll get this like yellow color stuff. This is basically pointless. Like, this is not helping you. This is hurting you to keep the fish reveal or whatever it is called on. And every time I get into a boat with someone, the first thing I do is just turn that off immediately. And it always helps. And then just using your regular setting is going to be a lot better for you.
Okay.
And then, like, when we're going around a brush pile, for example, I can pull up some recordings of some brush piles that have fish on them, which kind of give you an idea of what you might want to be looking for there. When you're going through on these like brush piles, bass, for example, on a brush pile will look like this.
Okay.
And so you can see a little brush pile here, and you can see these dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dots. You notice that a lot of these dots they're not that spread apart, but you can see these dots are spread apart enough where there's a little bit of space between them. Where the dots, when they're crappie, all of these dots that are in this image would be like right here. They'd be in like a quarter size area. Where instead, all of these dots there on the screen are spread out in like a dollar bill size area. And that's kind of how you can tell that they're bass versus crappie.
Okay, so the crappie are more size,
Tight together.
dollar size.
Correct, yeah. Yep, and I do have videos on this as well I can share when I send over this recording. I do have some videos on how to identify bass on the Fish Finder and also how to identify active bass. And you'll be able to watch those videos, and that will help you a lot on your Fish Finder. And I also do have a sonar settings video that you guys can check out, and so you'll be able to see how to set up your unit, and all those questions will get answered. And I do a very detailed job in those videos explaining. It's actually probably better to watch those and have me try to explain in person.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so basically that kind of took us through all the different seasons of the year, and really what the biggest key is on this lake for you guys is what's the water visibility, where's the bait fish, and where are the creek channels. If you can find bait fish, you know where the creek channels are, and you know what the water clarity is, you can use kind of what we talked about in this video lesson to kind of dial in where the fish are.
Okay. Sounds good. So the majority of our fishing probably needs to be down to the lower end of the lake, not the other end primarily.
If you're going to be fishing offshore. Now, there's times when I might be fishing up in the dirty water. So there's not a I wouldn't say that you have a worse chance of catching a lot of fish in this area of the lake. It's just the way you catch them is going to be different. So I would say that you have equal chance of catching 5 bass for 15 pounds in this section of the lake as you do on this section of the lake. It just depends on how you want to fish is the only difference.
Gotcha. That will work.
And so if you want to try the offshore game and that's what you're thinking, that's like the thing you guys want to figure out, then definitely down here is the way to go. But if you guys like fishing up shallow, or maybe you want to try some different patterns, this area is going to be still productive. I would just recommend in these areas to cover as much water as possible. I mean, I would probably be trying to cover at least 4 miles a day on your trolling motor if you're going to be fishing this area of the lake.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so just drop your trolling motor. I mean, fish as many docks as you can. I wouldn't be fishing slow. I'd pick up a bait like a lipless crankbait or a squirrel crankbait, a spinner bait, and I would just be burning down the bank, maybe a jig, pitching it like laydowns and stuff. But I would try to cover, like, in one day of fishing, if I was fishing for, let's say, 5 hours, it would be nothing to cover this whole entire creek in 5 hours for me. And I'd fish every inch of the bank through here. Or maybe I'd fish the entirety of from here out to the main lake. I would cover all of this in one day. And you might only get 4 or 5 bites, 6 bites, but they're usually going to be decent ones this time of year. And my thing is my goal in an 8-hour day when I fish up shallow is I want to make 1,000 casts a day. That's my goal going into a day. And that means if I make 1,000 casts, I need to get 5 casts where I catch a fish. Maybe 10 casts if I want to do well in a tournament. That means I only need to get bit on 1 out of every 100 casts that I'm making.
It's easy, but it's not that easy.
Yep.
That sounds about like our statistics. Because, I mean, I think we don't cast 1,000 times every time we go out. So that's probably about average. That's probably what we're doing. The only problem is we're just not fishing the productive area. So
Yeah.
But yeah, we're burning some banks.
This island that's back here, where you're at on the screen,
Yep.
during the springtime, they hammer that hard with the spawn.
Yeah.
People line up and just nail that island. Not that one, the long one.
Oh, this long one. Right back up.
It's right there. Right. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing.
No, this one right here. This big island. Yeah.
That is, yeah. That island there, they nail. Because there's so much timber, I guess, that they spawn in. But, man, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely certain areas on these lakes, too, in the spawn where the bigger fish seem to pull up consistently. That's something you'll just learn over the years of, like this island, for example, might just be a place where the big ones pull up. I have places on my lakes like that where over the years of the spawn, I just know I'm going to go fish this one pocket or this one section of a creek and catch them. Now, the other flip side of that is sometimes I know that there's so many people in those areas, I'll then try to pick off like random places where I might be able to catch one fish in this pocket, one fish in this pocket, one fish in this pocket, and kind of run around the lake and do that. Or you can pick an area like this where there's 1,000 fish spawning and just circle this island all day with everyone else and hope that you can outfish people. It's kind of the 2 techniques for that.
Yeah, that's what they do, yeah.
Yeah, that'll keep that in mind. I think it's definitely going to help. For sure. Let me ask you, like road beds and everything. How do you fish the road beds? Kind of find like I say, I've kind of marked those. Like if you kind of look right up here at the top of your screen there. It looks like there's a road bed that come across there at one point.
Right here?
But that one or to the right, directly across to the right. Keep going all the way around the other side. Keep going up. Keep going up. Keep going up. Keep going up. Yeah, like maybe right in there.
Right through here, maybe?
Yeah, that's an old road bed there, and the one to the left of it is a little road bed. So I guess you can kind of almost see it from above, can't you?
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm fishing road beds, really the big thing for me, let me see if this shows up over here on the old map. What I'm usually doing to fish a road bed in general, there's power lines. They don't really show it up on the map here, but what I'm trying to do on a road bed more than anything, let me pull up.
There's one. If you keep going to the right, nope. Okay. Keep going down to about 4 o'clock.
Okay.
All the way down, and it'll take exactly where we were at a while ago. And you go. Keep going. Keep going. All right. Down there, you can see where the dam's at.
Yep.
There's a cove. Yeah, kind of zoom in there, and back towards your left a little bit. Go back to the left. And that'll be, you'll see Island Station Airport out there, and that's where the road was.
Gotcha, out through in this area.
And there, yeah, you see that airport?
Yep.
There's right there. Yeah, that kind of leading out to that little island.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. The way I normally focus on road beds, let me pull up a place that we can actually take a look at. I'm just gonna drop a pin here. There's a lake in my there's a lake in Northwest Arkansas, or by my area, that has a really good underwater footage. I can just show you kind of what it looks like where the road bed's like completely out of the water, and I'll give you just a general idea of what I'm looking at. Let me see here.
Yeah, you ever go up to over the line in Gamble, any?
Yeah.
We were over there. I actually sent you an email. We were actually over there working in October.
Really?
Over in all the way west Mississippi.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Yeah. So like right here, you can see that there's a road that runs through here, an old road bed.
Okay.
And really, on my road bed deals, there's two things I'm looking for whenever I'm fishing road beds more than anything. The first is I'm looking for underwater culverts. And so if you take a look right here, it's actually really hard to see. Here's a better near footage, like right here. See this little culvert that's under the water here? It basically is like a little drainage area. And there's the road. Y'all see that?
Yeah.
That's the sort of stuff on the roads I'm looking for. This, or I'm looking for a bridge, a literal bridge underwater. And so if you can find an area where you get these like little culverts or little bridges, that's where 90% of my bass on road beds come from. Just fishing down the random road bed is never really that productive for me. But if I can let me pull up a recording over here and you can kind of see, let's see here, road bed. Here we go. A lot of times you can find on these road beds, for example, you're graphing down them, you can see, like, for example, right here, we're an area where the road was literally blown out. Right here, here's an old bridge, and the road's literally blown out here in the center. And there used to be a bridge there, but it's no longer there. That is, like, really, really good stuff right there. And I've caught some 7, 8, 9 pounders off this spot before. And then, if we keep going... See if I get, it's not what I'm looking for. Find the next, I got a bunch of these recordings of roads. Another road that I can show you is right here. So like this is an old road bed. Notice how the road comes through here and then there's a big hole in the road. There's another, this area is really, really good. So basically any places where you have like a gap in the roads, usually that means there's some sort of like a creek channel or some sort of difference in the road. And right here is another one of my really, really good spots. I catch a lot of big fish. That's always really good. And then another area that show you is an actual culvert that on the fish finder. And if we go through here, you can actually see it right here, right there. There's your culvert. You can actually see the little edge of the culvert right there. That's what it looks like on your down or your side imaging. And right here, you can actually see a little dot with a shadow there, a dot with a shadow there. One of those was a 6 3/4 pounder because I caught it first cast right off that spot, right after I graphed it.
Wow. That's cool. So you're primarily looking for the fish that are on top.
On top of the road beds usually. Sometimes you can find them on the sides, but really on road beds, what I focus more on than even graphing fish is I just want to find these areas where you have these culverts or a bridge. There's fish around those areas year-round all the time.
Okay.
And then once I know it's there, those are spots where I just have them marked. I'll just pull up and just fish them, make 10, 15 casts on them a couple times a day when I know the fish are offshore, and I'll just roll on. It's just these are just kind of like spots that you just know about, and I'll just fish them. I'll just add them into my rotation every time.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, and you can really what you just do is like if you look at what I did here, I literally just graphed down the entirety of the road bed. And sometimes it's kind of hard to stay on top of them, but I'm just graphing down this whole road bed, just kind of see if I see any fish, if I see anything. And I was graphing down it, and then I kind of lost it, and I kind of got back on it. And then finally going through all of this, I finally found that culvert. I was like, boom, there's the spot. And I caught him. And the rest of the road bed was not any good. It was like a mile-long road bed, and the only spot that was good on it was right here on this culvert.
That'll work, yeah, because that way, nobody else knows about it, That's just a little spot that you know, and you can mark and come and fish.
Yep,
so
for sure.
That's the main thing. I think I just need to leave the fishing poles at home and just ride around on the lake.
That's the biggest thing for finding spots like this. If you don't find them on Google Earth, it's just, and even like if you find a spot, like let's say you go 1 week, you might find that there's a bunch of fish on this point right here, and you can pull up here and catch them every cast. Well, usually this point from like a spot like this might be good for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then after that, the fish are gone, and you have to find a new spot. And so the guys who are winning these tournaments and doing well in all of your events and stuff, they're probably fishing these lakes 3-4 days a week, or they fish the lake for 15, 20 years, and they know in March when water temperature is this temperature, here's 5 spots I've caught big fish in before, and they just go fish history.
Gotcha.
But you can combat that if you do make sure you drive around and look at the lake and find these spots. And whenever I pre-fish and practice for tournaments, I probably graph 75% of my day and fish 25% of my day. That's kind of my average whenever I was fishing tournaments.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, and I guess on the topo maps, I mean, does it kind of show the road beds and stuff?
You put a video out the other day on paper maps, man. You got to get it.
I did.
Yeah.
You got to get the paper maps. The Navionics never shows the road beds correctly. I don't think I've ever found a road bed using a Navionics map ever.
Okay.
It's all about the paper maps.
Now, is it based on the GPS coordinates? Is that why? Because they use different GPS coordinates?
No, they just, I don't know why, but I think someone says there might be a road here and they just throw it on as like a throwaway thing, but they don't really actually check that much.
Okay.
I don't know. It's weird. I don't know why they even put road bed markers on here because they're never accurate ever. But
Yeah. I don't know if you can tell based on the topo map.
No.
not really either. They don't do a good job. You can kind of maybe tell sometimes, but most of the time, like for example on this road bed here, even if it was on the topo map, the elevation of this road bed is only like a foot, and that won't show up very well on the map.
Gotcha.
So that little depression there won't really show on the map very well.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed on that Garmin I got, it actually showed some spots, like for instance, kind of what you're showing here, that little island, how it comes out of that point right there to the right.
Yep.
It comes way out. There's actually a lot of points that shows up on the Garmin. It does not show up on Navionics. I don't know why.
That will happen for sure. These Navionics maps, just to give you an idea of how they do it, basically, one of my buddies actually worked for Navionics for years, being their grapher. And literally what they do is they just drive around the lake and they try to capture as much as they can of the lake. But they don't do a thing where they don't graph every single inch of it. They try their best, but like time-wise, they can only graph so much of the lake. And so a lot of the spots and stuff here are just projections. Like, they just project that, like, they drove like this and then like this and like that. And they'll just assume, like, okay, it's consistent and flat through here. But maybe there's actually a nice little culvert and a little high spot right there. But because they graphed here and they graphed there, they missed right there. And then they just kind of guessed that it was all straight.
Okay.
That's how a lot of these maps are made. So they're not going to be perfectly accurate most of the time.
Okay. Yeah. Now, how does Garmin do it?
They probably do the exact same thing. They just probably graphed different. They just hit this bank differently. Maybe when one guy zigged, the other guy zagged. And so maybe part of Garmin's map is incorrect, part of Navionics' map is incorrect. If you put them both together, it would probably be way more accurate.
And there's nowhere to do that, right?
No, there's not, unfortunately.
No. All right. Well, that works. That definitely gives us a lot more information. Like I mean, a lot of times, like with my son working and things like that, getting out of school, he just got home today from school. So, it only leaves a certain number of hours. But yeah, we definitely, if we're going to catch some fish versus just going and, fishing, we need to do a lot more running around the lake.
There's no replacement for time on the water, and the guys who are good, they just spend way more time on the water than most people. And that's like when I was good to tournaments, it was because I was fishing 3-4 days a week. Now I'm fishing for lessons and videos and stuff, but I'm still not good enough to go compete in local tournaments on these lakes because I'm just not fishing the same lake 3 days a week. I just wouldn't be able to go compete against the locals consistently. I could do well, maybe 1 out of every 5 tournaments and like maybe compete, but the other days I might just go catch 3, 4, 5 fish. Like, I'm not going to go blow it out of the water.
Gotcha. Kind of what the fish patterns we're doing, things like that, certain times of the year. That's the biggest thing because it's kind of hard to find the videos and things like that actually kind of breaks it down like you do. So breaking down on that specific lake and saying, all right, this would be a good area, this would be good, and things like that, kind of definitely helped out a lot. So at least I know kind of where I want to go fish and kind of be productive more so than just wasting time. So
awesome.
So appreciate that.
For sure. Well, guys, thanks so much for signing up for the lesson. And I'll be shooting over the recording of this lesson this afternoon, and that way you can watch that video back as many times as you want. And if you have any questions after you watch it back through and you're like, oh, I wish I would ask that, just shoot me an email in response to that, and I'll be able to get back to you guys.
Okay. Sounds good, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Take care, man.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.